My name is Mrs. Hutchinson, and I'm the wellness counselor here at Fossil. One of my main roles is to support students struggling with substance use. I also run the Wellness Center, which is located in the back left corner of the Media Center, and this is a great space to receive support, to utilize coping tools, self-regulation tools on those really hard days. Throughout this presentation, there will be 2 journal exercises that you'll need a notebook or a Google Doc for towards the beginning of the presentation. And there will be 3 reflection exercises that we'll do towards the middle and end of the presentation that you will need your computer for because we'll be completing it on a Google form. So go ahead and get a notebook out now and have your computer ready as well. Also, we want to make sure this is a safe space for everyone. Conversations about substance use can be tough or triggering for some people. We don't know what everybody has been through or what they might be currently going through. So please be kind and respectful to your classmates if you guys do choose to have conversations throughout the presentation. We are actually going to start right now with our first journal exercise. So go ahead and get your notebook out and we'll see you soon. So this is my 8th year as a counselor, and prior to coming to Fossil last year, I worked at a residential youth treatment center and also at a maximum security youth facility. So throughout my career, I've really specialized in working with youth struggling with addictions. Throughout my career, I've seen the devastating impacts that substance use can have on one's life and the lives of their loved ones and all of those around them. I've seen this pain not only in my work in the community, but also in our own community here at Fossil. The truth is that statistically, at some point in every single one of our lives, every single one of us will be negatively impacted by addiction some way. That could be personal, that could be dealing with a friend, family, loved one that is struggling with an addiction. And the truth is that this pain and suffering is preventable. And when we look at the prevalence of substance use in our country, we know that American teens use drugs at a higher rate than teens in any other country. We know that approximately 1 in 12 Americans over the age of 12 are addicted to drugs. And if we look at data from last year's 2019 Healthy Kids Colorado survey, we see that about 25% of teens report vaping or using e-cigarettes. We see that alcohol use among teens is reported to be a little bit more than that, and marijuana use is reported to be a little bit less than that. And when we look at our community, we see that in Larimer, we see that among students who drank alcohol during the past 30 days, the percentage who had 3 or more drinks in a row within a couple of hours, teens in Larimer County in this category actually scored even higher than the state average. So maybe you've never used before. Maybe you've thought about it. Maybe you've used a couple times. Maybe you use substances daily, or maybe you use multiple times a day. Wherever you find yourself on that spectrum, I want you to know that first of all, you're not alone. You're not the only one here. And secondly, you are all equally welcome to this conversation. Ultimately, I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your body, this is your brain, this is your life. And what you choose to put into your body is an intimate decision. The goals of this presentation are first of all to make you aware of the supports and resources available to you here at Fossil, so that if you are struggling, you can reach out. We also want you to practice informed decision making, right? So making decisions about substance use, knowing the potential consequences of your choices.
There she was. There she was. There she was.
As a counselor, I don't think that we can have a conversation about substance use without first looking at mental health. Just like we have physical health, sometimes our bodies feel great. Sometimes we get the flu or break a bone and our body has to heal. And some people have physical ailments that they have to take medication and do therapies for throughout their entire lives. Similarly, we also have mental health, right? Sometimes things in our lives are going well. Sometimes we have really stressful things going on in our lives and in the world, like COVID, or having a really stressful semester. And this increased stress can create more anxiety and depression for a period of time. And some people have mental health disorders, which they have to manage throughout their entire lives with things like medication and therapies. We typically don't turn to substances regularly and in excess amounts as an escape to change our state when we're feeling great mentally and emotionally. If we don't intentionally have healthy tools and supports available, we can intentionally or unintentionally turn to unhealthy substances to escape. Research shows that about 60% of teens struggling with a substance use disorder are also struggling with a mental health disorder, and vice versa. So this is a slide of all of our counselors and supports available. So first of all, our job is literally to support you. That's why we're here. So if you're struggling, if you feel like you don't have any healthy coping tools to deal with stressors, if you feel like you are struggling with substances or mental health stuff, we want to be here to support you in any way that we can. So please reach out. So first of all, we have our amazing caseload counselors. Guys, these amazing people wear so many hats within the school, and they are here to support you socially, emotionally, in any way that they can. We also have Mrs. Cole. She's an amazing resource. She's our mental health specialist. She's a great person to meet with. She can also do things like connect you with therapists outside of school. I am so happy to be a resource for you here in any way that I can. I do meet with students a lot individually. I'm also looking to start a group with youth who are looking to quit substances. So if you're interested, my email is right there. Please contact me anytime. Guys, we also have a building filled with teachers and supports who care so much about you and, again, want to support you in any way that they can. And lastly, we have some really great classes within Fossil. We have health classes. We have teen choices. We have Mind Center. We have Discovery, which is a class that teaches social emotional support tools and skills that you get credit for and you get to take out into your life. And if you're not comfortable receiving support in school, we have a lot of amazing community resources as well. So Al-Anon Al-Teen groups are support groups for family and friends of alcoholics. So this is a place where you can get together with people who are struggling with similar issues with family or friends. We also have great counseling services like the Center for Family Outreach and Summit Stone. These are great places to get that extra mental health support through therapy and groups. There's also groups like Marijuana Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, within our community. We are going to switch to our reflection activities. So go ahead and get your computer in front of you and type in this Google form address in your browser. If you have a phone available, you can take a picture of the QR code and fill out the form on there as well. So please know that filling out this Google form and actively participating in the reflection activities throughout the presentation is required for participation credit today. So please make sure you do that and hit submit. I also got over $300 worth of gift cards donated for this presentation. And in order to be eligible or randomly selected, you have to hit submit on this Google form. So I did ask, especially in this first reflection session, I did ask a couple of questions, like have you ever used vaping or substances, drugs or alcohol? So the reason for that is because my position is under a grant, and so I have to collect data for the state. And so the way I worded the questions were kind of past tense, have you ever? So there would be no reason, nobody's going to follow up with you or ever share that information with anyone. I also made it so if you do not feel comfortable, that you don't have to fill out that question. But if you can, it just kind of helps us collect some of that data. So we're going to take a really quick look at how substances change the brain from a neuroscience perspective. So if we were to take my brain and cut it open like this, we would see about 80 billion of these tiny spaghetti-like structures called nerve cells or neurons. And one really interesting way to look at how substances change the brain is to look at what happens in between two of these nerve cells or neurons. So we have nerve cell 1 and nerve cell 2. So an emotion is a sensory feeling that gets translated into electrical impulses that start traveling down the nerve cell. At the end of the nerve cell, something really interesting happens. Neurotransmitters are released. So the best way that I've been taught to remember neurotransmitters are they transfer information into the nervous system. So these neurotransmitters or happy chemicals, some of the really popular ones that we know are like dopamine, serotonin, GABA. They give us these good feeling highs almost that our body produces naturally. So the moment that these neurotransmitters plug into the receptor number 2, it starts an electrical impulse, and that is what we experience as a feeling. So every feeling that we have is made by chemicals running through the body. So an interesting thing to look at is when we introduce substances into the brain. So the way that substances are able to get through this blood-brain barrier that keeps unhealthy pathogens out is they mimic neurotransmitters that we already create in our brains naturally. And so we'll look at marijuana. So THC mimics the neurotransmitter anandamide. So what happens is that when somebody ingests or smokes marijuana, copies of these neurotransmitters are released. And it really is a matter of quantity, right? Like the body would never release this much anandamide at once. And when the brain gets flooded with all of these neurotransmitters, the body is extremely intelligent and is constantly working to balance itself. So the factories that make the neurotransmitters that sit on this side of the cell, they stop production. They're like, whoa, this is way too much, right? We have to keep the body balanced. On the other end, these receptor sites are extremely, extremely delicate. And when the brain registers that there's too much production, production slows down or stops. And people, as a result of this, you're getting less of those happy chemicals because you're not producing as much on your own. And people tend to feel more sad and anxious and want to use more, which creates that whole cycle of use as well. This system is not unique to marijuana, right? We could, psychedelics, they really mimic the neurotransmitter serotonin, right? Cocaine really mimics the neurotransmitter dopamine. And a thing that often happens with substances is that we have a rebound effect. So if somebody started using substances, so say they used alcohol, they're like, I just feel more anxious, and when I use, my anxiety decreases, right? So what happens with substances is there's a rebound effect. So because of this imbalance in neurotransmitters, after that high from the alcohol has worn off, oftentimes people's anxiety and depression rises higher than it was before they started using. So every feeling is made by these chemicals running through the body. And so when we disrupt these chemicals, again, it disrupts how we show up in our lives, not only for ourselves, but for others as well. Another really interesting way to look at how substance use impacts the brain is to look at these things called SPECT scans. So with SPECT scans, what they do is they inject somebody with a radioactive substance and it measures blood flow and glucose levels in people's brains. So we see this picture of the right. This is a SPECT scan of a healthy teenage brain. The smooth surfaces with mild bumps shows that this brain is getting steady blood flow and enough energy, right? All these parts of the brain are functioning properly. On the left, we see this picture of an 18-year-old who started smoking 3 years ago at the age of 15, about 4 times a week. We see these areas of the brain where the holes appear to be. Okay, they're not actual holes. These are areas of the brain where blood flow and glucose is lacking. And what we know from neuroscience is that if your brain is functioning properly, your life is going to function properly, right? And so when we look at this brain, we see at the top where that's circled in the number 1, that prefrontal cortex, that big CEO of the brain in charge of higher level thinking, planning, problem solving, decision making, emotional regulation, is not going to be operating to its full capacity because of that lack of glucose and blood flow. On the right, we see this picture of a 28-year-old who has smoked for the past 10 years, so started when he was 18 years old, 2 times a week. We see that these areas of the brain where blood flow and glucose are lacking, they're not as big, and that's likely because he waited, right, a lot longer than the other individual. And this is a really powerful picture. Obviously, the age of legal use is 21 years old, but I always say the longer you can hold off, the longer you can wait, the better. There is a massive growth, reorganization happening in people's brains between the ages of 12 and 25. And because of this growth and reorganization, at this stage in your life, you're just much more susceptible to damage from substances, and you're much more susceptible to things like addictions. Go ahead and get your Google form back out on your desktop or on your phone. We are going to complete section 2, which is just testing your drug knowledge. So just go ahead and fill out these questions as best you can. when looking at vaping, I think a really important thing to consider is that vaping is so new, and we just don't have the research on the effects of what vaping will do long term. So really the people using today are the guinea pigs for scientists because we just don't know. Another important thing to consider with vaping is what is inside the juice, right? There's so many different products out there. They all have different combinations of different chemicals, but a lot of these mixes contain chemicals like diacetyl. This is a chemical that can cause serious lung disease when inhaled regularly over time. Volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, mostly nickel, chromium, tin are found in e-liquids. Exposure can have a variety of negative health effects, including harm to the brain. Another important thing to consider is that one Juul pod contains 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine. The amount of nicotine in one standard Juul cartridge is roughly equal to the amount of nicotine in a pack of cigarettes, or about 200 puffs. Yale researchers have a lot of evidence that the teenage brain is extremely sensitive to nicotine. Teens who use nicotine can harm parts of the brain that control attention, learning, information processing, mood, and impulse controls. Using nicotine can lead to an addiction. Nicotine is always within the top 5 most addictive substances. And in some ways, when you get addicted to a drug, you lose your freedom of choice. My favorite definition of an addiction is something that you can't control. Personally, I quit using nicotine about 13 years ago, and it was one of the best decisions that I've ever made. Alcohol is pretty toxic for the brain and body, especially when taken in high amounts. So we see these 2 MRI scans. The one on the left is a 15-year-old non-drinker. The one on the right is a 15-year-old heavy drinker. These functional MRI scans of 2 teens were taken while they took a working memory test. So the images show that the heavy drinker on the right isn't using those brain areas normally used to complete a memory test, while the non-drinker on the left is. Researchers suggest that in school, heavy drinkers may not be activating those regions of the brain required to remember a lesson. Looking at the sequence in which alcohol affects the brain. First, alcohol affects that forebrain, that planning, problem solving, decision making, higher level thinking, motor coordination, right? This is why when under the influence, a lot of times people don't make the best decisions. They will make decisions that they regret because this part of the brain is not functioning properly when under the influence. Then alcohol goes to the midbrain. So this is when people lose control over their emotions, right? So oftentimes we'll hear of or like see in movies, or maybe you've seen it, people just crying in the bathrooms, right? Or a lot of times when alcohol is involved, fights break out. And finally, it affects the brainstem, so heart rate, body temperature, appetite, consciousness. This can be a really dangerous and potentially fatal situation. So when I was in high school, I had a really good friend who was a year ahead of me. He went to a college party at one point, drank way too much. He was being really annoying and belligerent, and so people put him on a couch in a room and just left him there, and he ended up passing away. So really important. These things can absolutely be prevented. And I'm so passionate about people knowing about the Good Samaritan fatal overdose law. So death by overdose is absolutely preventable if emergency and medical assistance is provided quickly. So the person must call 911, give 911 the name of the person that you're concerned about, and your name as well, and remain on the scene until emergency personnel arrives. These policies protect you as the caller and the victim who you are worried about has ingested too much of something, from arrest and or prosecution for simple drug possession charges, paraphernalia. Even if you're under the influence, you'll still be protected. So please, please remember this. And if you are worried about somebody, do not hesitate to reach out and save their lives. In my line of work, there is no greater pain that I've seen than from the pain of somebody struggling with an opioid addiction. Prescription drugs like opioids have extremely powerful effects on the brain and the body. Researchers estimate that about 80% of people entering rehab for a heroin addiction started out using prescription drugs. The truth is that nobody who starts using drugs thinks that they're going to become addicted. I know today we are just starting the conversation on substances like marijuana, alcohol, vaping, but please know that the effects of things like prescription drugs, cocaine, meth, heroin are extremely powerful and addictive. If you are struggling with any type of an addiction, please consider reaching out and getting support. In sticking with the theme of informed decision making, this is the PSD Code of Conduct. Please know that if you choose to bring substances to school, PSD has a really strict code of conduct for suspensions and expulsions for bringing substances like drugs and alcohol to school. For example, the first offense for, say, alcohol is a 5-day suspension. Second offense is a 10-day suspension. Third offense is expulsion. And for substances like marijuana, you get one suspension and then the second time is an expulsion. Unfortunately, a suspension from school can also mean a suspension from your next sport. So for a first offense for suspension, that means that the current sport you're playing or the next sport that you have, you will not be eligible to play in 30% of that sport's games. For a second offense, you will not be able to play in 50% of the games, and for a third offense, that is high school sports career expulsion. So what can you do? Continue this conversation. Continue to educate yourselves. Know what you're putting into your body. Know how it's affecting your brain and your body and your long-term goals. If you are currently using, continue to explore underlying reasons behind use, right? Are there some mental health issues? Is there some emotional pain that you can get support for and work to heal? Explore ways to feel good naturally. So just like we saw in that slide on in that drawing that I did on how substances impact and change the brain, we know that our body is a really intelligent system and it knows how to produce these good feeling chemicals in healthy amounts. So doing things that you enjoy, like exercising, being around people you love, being out in nature are all really powerful ways to feel good without the consequences that substances bring. One of my favorite quotes from Tony Robbins is, "Who you hang out with is who you become." So if you look at your friend group and think about where you think they might be in 5 years, right? If you continue to surround yourself with that type of energy and those types of patterns and habits that your friends have, you're probably likely going to be in a similar space. And with that, just having those healthy boundaries, right? No person, no party is worth you sacrificing your future for. And lastly, of course, having those goals out in front of you and asking yourself, is this choice going to take me towards my goals or is it going to take me away from my goals? If someone you know and love is struggling with a substance use disorder, it can be a really hard situation to navigate. So here are some talking tips. First of all, talking to them when they're sober. Secondly, explain your feelings, right? It's really important to be real and sincere and to come from a place of I love you and I care about you rather than a place of judgment. So be specific. Use specific examples of when the addiction or use has worried, caused harm, or had a negative impact. And really important, get a trusted adult involved, right? This is a big thing happening in this person's life, and you are not responsible for that, and you are not responsible for doing that all by yourself. So getting other people involved can be really helpful and powerful for that person who is struggling. And lastly, take care of yourself, right? One of the hardest things in life is that we cannot control what other people do or the decisions we make, no matter how much we show up for them or how much we love them. But what we are in control of is taking care of ourselves. So making sure that you are meeting your own needs, getting enough sleep, exercise, and making sure that you are maintaining those healthy relationships. Remember that addiction is a disease, and it usually has a lot of deep underlying issues tied to it that can take a while to heal. So this is our final reflection activity. So go ahead and go back to your Google form and complete section 3 and make sure to submit to be entered for the gift card. So if you were selected for one of the many gift cards, I will shoot you an email. So please, if I can support you in any way, please reach out to me anytime. My email is right there. I also live in the back left corner of the media center. So if you want to continue this conversation, if you want support, if you want to argue, I'm here for all of it. So I look forward to connecting with you. Thank you guys so much for showing up for this conversation. It takes a lot of courage, and I hope to talk to you soon.